All right, let's go ahead and start things off with the 4 characters that I recommend for the tanking class to get you from Bronze 5 to Plat 1. Firstly, and the easiest one to use on this list, Reinhardt. He is good at every rank. He can be easy to feed with, but if you know what you're doing, you can stay alive. He has a massive health pool, and you can basically just beat your enemies down on any map that, you know, requires you to hold a point or push a payload or push a robot. Whatever you may be doing, holding that objective, he is your guy. And then nextly on the list, I have Ramatra. He is very the same as Reinhardt. He is good at beating people up, except his long-range poke does a lot of damage if you can learn how to line it up. He has a shield as well that you can use, and his ult, in my opinion, is arguably still one of the best ults in the game. It sways the tide more often than not and wins you team fights. After that, I have Sigma. He is quite a bit harder to learn than the other ones. You have to line up his projectiles, but he's really, really good at long-range maps and at poking people. I think he's one of the most well-balanced tanks in the game. He also has a shield. If you see a common theme here, for players that want to climb or newer players, I recommend using a tank with a shield because like when you're out of position, you can create your own good positioning to get yourself back into position using your shield. But again, Sigma, very, very good tank. My personal favorite tank. I have the most hours on him out of any other tank. He's really, really good, very well balanced. You can use him to climb exponentially, in my opinion. His rock is kind of hard to hit, but his projectiles are also kind of hard to hit. You got to be in a certain range with him. He's a little bit harder to learn, but I highly, highly recommend Sigma. He's my favorite tank. I think that he does well against every other tank and most comps. And then lastly, if you need a dive tank, if you need to jump on a character that is messing up your team or whatever, I recommend Winston. He is not that hard to learn. I say the harder part about him is knowing when to take angles and whatnot. Like his is very positioning based. His ultimate is really hard to get value from if you don't know what you're doing. But other than that, I mean, you just jump on people and beam them down. He has very few mechanics outside of his ultimate. It's just kind of jump, land, and beam people and put your bubble up. All right, let's talk about getting value as tank. So your value comes from you being in a good position, staying alive, and fighting enemies that are not the enemy tank. And that means that most of the time you are ignoring the enemy tank. You don't really want to face the enemy tank in a head-on battle. You want to be looking past them onto their supports or DPS players or someone else roughly out of position or just not getting as much healing or whatever. Someone who you can help focus down with your DPS. Fighting the enemy tank brings you literally no value because most of the time the damage that you do will be healed instantly by the supports. So most of your value comes from fighting past them rather at them. Now, one of the biggest things that the game recognizes between a good and bad player or a player that it thinks deserves to climb is how you position yourself and how much you value your life. So good positioning and good like engagements and whatnot, it means that you always wait after you die or after most of your team dies to group up with the majority of your team before going in. Going in by yourself leads to you dying again and feeding and whatnot and all that jazz. And then also, if you can recognize and pay attention when your supports die or when a key DPS player dies, that you start backing up and giving space to conserve your own life until that person comes back. Or if you just pull out completely, knowing when to fight and when not to fight is probably one of the biggest parts of being a tank. If you see one of your teammates die and your immediate reaction is you have to get a pick, so you try and push in and get closer, and then you in turn die, that's what keeps most people in the lower ranks. That when you see one of your teammates die, you should see how much pressure is then being given to you and like how much space you need to relinquish because of your teammate's death, or if you can immediately trade it out. There's so many things that go into that, but mostly it's just your positioning and whether or not you want to continue an engagement or not that can determine your rank. Because if you're a feeder or if you conserve your life, because staying alive and keeping the pressure on is way better than being dead. Now, I could be one of those people that drags on this video forever, giving you little tiny pointers here and there about nothing that makes sense, but I am not. I'm later going to make videos on like how to for like Sigma or Ryan or like more in depth on those characters, but like basically the majority of what you need to know for climbing like as tank because there's like a billion other things you could learn for support or DPS. Like, they are very mechanical, more so than the tanks. The tanks are probably some of the least mechanical characters in the game, outside of maybe Ball or Doom, which are some of the highest skill characters in the game. But like, for the baseline tanks, all you need to know is when you take your fights and positioning yourself where you have cover and where you have an escape route. And then when teammates die, understanding to peel back. And then from there, it's just learning how to kill people more, like with your certain character. Like, you'll get better with characters over time, but the majority of tank and ranking up is just understanding when to go in and when to come out. You'd be surprised at how few people know when to go in and when to come out. And when to come out is when one or more teammates are dead, and when to go in is when you have all 5 of your teammates with you. Pretty basic stuff. But yeah, have a good day.